You see, each experience in life is its own reward. If you purpose a certain thing, then you also experience it from both sides. Now, obviously, that experience of it gives you a much fuller perspective of what you're creating than simply what you purposed to begin with. Experience is that. It's the filling out of the fullness of what you are experiencing. So, for argument's sake, if you wish to experience divorce because of various problems, you experience the fullness of that. You both get divorced and you experience being divorced by someone else. You experience both being the, if you like, the perpetrator and the victim. And when you realize the two always go together, because life is the experiencing of the fulfilling of the understanding of the phenomena that is presented in life. As you experience that fullness, you come to hate divorce. You know? Now, does that mean I caused divorce in the first place? And that is the reason I've experienced it in my life. Well, the essence of it, yes. I probably ignored one friend for another. I've separated a friendship in favour of something that looked glitteringly more attractive to me, and passed by the needs of the person I'm separating from. You know, I mean, we do this as a kiddie, don't we? Whether we do this because we've experienced such on a major scale in previous lives, possibly, but I don't mean necessarily incarnations in this, but that we've come from a realm and we're going to a realm. We've come from a realm where we were not fully ready for the kingdom of heaven, to where we will be fully ready for the kingdom of heaven. Well, I'm seeing it like that anyway. I'm imagining it like that. So each realm that we might visit, so to speak, if we visit hell, may that not be our need, but if we do visit hell, it's not because we're condemned to it in some medieval scriptural understanding of scripture, but rather that our soul cries out for such experience, for we delight in some form of evil, which makes it appropriate that we experience it more and more fully, from both causing it and receiving it. And no doubt the fullness of that understanding will give us a deep repellence, such that we cry out to return to the glory of God. Does that validate the Inquisition? Because it sounds very close to the same argument, that we must cause havoc for this person in order that they don't have an eternal damnation. Well, I don't know about that. I can't see the Inquisition administered by man as being anything but full of fallacies and misunderstandings and so on. But I can take it that there is a divine, not just justice, but loving justice, that somehow transforms what I understand to be the condemnation of hell into being, on the contrary, the opportunity, the gateway to heaven. Because my God is all good and all powerful. And therefore, he does all things well. So I seek an explanation consistent with that. And whether it's the right explanation, I don't know. But I do fundamentally believe that it's the right intention to look for such. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Now, of course, we're only talking about values. We're not talking about rules. It is not always the case that initiating a divorce is wrong. For instance, where you divorce someone because their behaviour endangers your children, and you take the children into protection from them. You can't say that's wrong. There's a priority of values, you see. There are circumstances in which you would kill. Killing is not good. We value life. We value life. We value some things above others. I might value the life of my family greater than the person who's attacking them, and I may have to kill them. That is not wrong. That is right. Do you see? It is not a question of commandments and rules. It's a question of values and principles. And they are hierarchical. And that's what is in the Jesus story. You know, my Father heals. You may see that as work, but it's still right. Yes, it's a breach of a Sabbath rule. Does it breach the principle of the Sabbath? No, it doesn't. It breaches the rule of the Sabbath. But in principle, we value the Sabbath. We don't value it more than man. Man is not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made to bless man. Equally with the showbread in the temple, David takes it and feeds it to his men who are hungry. And we don't want men fighting on an empty stomach. They're there to defend the nation. So in principle, he's still right. By rule, he's wrong as regards the rule. He's in breach of the rule. We're not interested in rules. We're interested in righteousness. Justice is not rule imposition. Justice doesn't come about by imposing rules. Justice comes about by equity. Equity is a notion of fairness. It's driven by a concern for welfare, not rules. In other words, if the rules are found to be unfair, then they must be overridden. They should be breached. It's a question of judgment, not a bureaucrat imposing rules. Hence the French judge says, quoted, that this is not a court of justice. This is a court of law. Justice, you see, has some understanding of fairness, rightness, righteousness. But of course, people see justice as arbitrary. It's according to the decision of the judge, the one judging. It's always open to criticism. The judge, ideally, we feel, should be impartial, seeking that which is right, honouring, in a sense, basic values, which we might refer to as rights, not necessarily the imposition of the rule. We go some way in the legal system by giving the judge the opportunity to vary sentence. You know, he could let you off with a fine, or he could send you to prison. And sometimes there are restrictions on, often there are restrictions on what he can do this, where the range is. You know, minimum of so-and-so fine, maximum of 3 years in prison. Quite simply, we have certain values, and we arrange our laws and rules to try and achieve these values. Where they clearly don't, then there should be some justice that overrules such inadequacy. And this ideally is the function of the judge, but we actually don't have that. We have the judge being overruled by the legal system that he's in, imposition of authority above him, which is Parliament. He's not left as the judge. He can only judge whether a thing falls within a certain category, and you can appeal against that to a higher court, which in the British system ultimately meant that you could appeal to Parliament itself, a particular subcommittee of Parliament, if you like, the House of Lords, in effect, and those law lord justices would decide the issue. But they were still justices, you see. Strictly speaking, they were not legislators. But in some sense they had the authority to change the outcome of simply imposing the legislation in this particular case. And they might make certain rulings, which of course lower courts would follow in the future. And well, even then the top court, the House of Lords, would have the right, the justices would have the right to not to be bound by their own previous approach, and could act differently. They could be overruled by the legislature. Even then the justices might appeal to the Crown on the grounds that the legislature acted in some sense beyond its authority. Whether that is in reality the case is quite another thing, of course, because the monarch in a modern state goes on the advice of the chief executive of the executive body, the Prime Minister, and obviously that's part and parcel driving the decision making of the legislature, so there aren't real separation of powers going on to the degree that you might have thought was best. But to return to spiritual matters as opposed to legality of things, God is understood to do what is right, because he has all noble purpose and ability and understanding, you know. So that is what we are concerned to adhere to. And that's not simply a matter of keeping rules, but grace love, because God is purposed on a particular outcome, which is our salvation. That is what we value. A God who is concerned for our welfare. And he acts accordingly. He takes into account not just the present, but the future and all time. At least from our understanding here. He probably does far more than we could possibly imagine, but we can only surmise that which we're able to. Quite simple, legality is not up to righteousness. What we truly understand by justice, righteous judgment, is the decision in the light of noble purpose, the will of God, seen as the ultimate in noble purpose. Of course, our view of that might vary greatly, but in some ultimate sense, that is what would be right, by definition. Thank you, Dad.